Welcome back to the 411 on Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, Blake Lovell, back once again here with some thoughts on Friday on a pretty significant milestone for AEW coming out of the buzz surrounding All Out. We've talked about it all week, and the ratings seem to support that there is an unprecedented amount of buzz surrounding AEW, as with Wednesday night's edition of Dynamite in Cincinnati, which saw the likes of Jon Moxley versus Minoru Suzuki. You had Bryan Danielson and Adam Cole, both back once again for their first appearance on Dynamite after debuting it All Out. You had much more CM Punk starting a feud seemingly with Team Taz, and so much more. Everything coming out of All Out led to Dynamite earning a pretty significant, achievement in their history to this point, which is a little less than 2 years since the show started. 1.319 million viewers was the overnight audience, according to Brandon Thurston from WrestleNomics, who we've had on the podcast before. And we're actually going to work on getting Brandon back on here again soon, because a lot has changed since we've talked to him a couple months ago with the landscape of wrestling. And the 1.319 million viewers for Dynamite was the second biggest audience in the history of the show thus far. Viewership up by approximately 272,000 viewers from the overnight audience from last week. Again, coming off of All Out, everything surrounding that pay-per-view, everything coming out of it. It was wait and see how many people could possibly tune in. How big is the jump from a viewership standpoint? Well, that's what you get there with that number. But the thing that people are talking about in a much bigger sense is that the ratings in the key 18 to 49 demographic, which we've always talked about, Dynamite hits a rating of 0.526, which is up from 0.38 in the same demo from the prior week. Now, remember, here's what's big about this, and this is what we're going to be talking about, I think, for the months to come, really, is Dynamite in the key demo, when we look at the ratings there, 18 to 49, beat Raw, which was on Labor Day, also something worth noting, a holiday edition of Raw, which Raw had a 0.523. So 0.526 Dynamite, 0.523 for Raw. So that's not a lot, as you can tell, but it is something that is worth pointing out, that this was a first for AEW to be able to do this, and now that is going to be something that you're going to hear a lot about, like I said, over the next several months, because this is certainly, again, for a show that's only been around less than 2 years now, I mean, for it to do what it just did by putting out this kind of number following the pay-per-view, that is something. And I know that we've often talked about, everyone likes to really make a lot of the AEW versus WWE stuff and all of that. And to a certain extent, unless you're in the businesses with both of them and on the business side of working for AEW or WWE, it's one of those things that people like to discuss and talk about. But, overall, for the average fan, it doesn't mean a whole lot. This is something, though, that I think is going to be worth discussing as we move forward, because, yes, Raw Holiday Edition, obviously you're normally going to average a lower viewership rating and all of that for a Holiday Edition more than a normal week. But still, I mean, this is the bigger thing here is that this is supporting that AEW's growth is not just a one-time thing. Like, it's not just something that you're going to see a CM Punk come back, get a huge rating out of that, and then everything's going to go back to 700,000, 800,000, whatever, 900,000 viewers. Clearly, adding a Bryan Danielson, adding an Adam Cole, everything coming out of All Out being regarded as, again, for a lot of people in recent times, one of the better pay-per-views they've seen. It draws that buzz that you need to support this type of viewership and to gain these viewers. And, that's what we've talked about on several podcasts this week, about how that was the goal, was to, once you make these moves, it's great and it's giving you bigger star power, but the ultimate goal is, can these new additions, can everything you're doing with the promotion and your storylines and all of these stars you're trying to build, can that all equate into bringing in more viewers? And that's what it's about. That's how you grow your business. Get more eyeballs on everything, and that's what AEW has done here, and put up just a pretty remarkable number coming off of All Out. Now, next week, will the number be the same? Probably not. I wouldn't, predict that. I think it will certainly go back down. But how much further down, I think, is the big point there, because you start moving that new normal from, like we said earlier, at one point, what was it? It was probably 800,000, 700,000, whatever. But now we've seen gradually that number getting to the height of everything is going up further and further. And then it's dropping back down to where the new normal, is over that 1 million mark. So can you make your new normal 1.1 million, 1.2 million? The more you can do that, and by the way, you've also got things to come here. You've got some big shows you're building towards. Pay-per-view wise, we know that's going to be Full Gear in November. But before you get there, you've got the Arthur Ashe Stadium show coming up in a couple weeks. You've got a lot more stuff in the works, seemingly. And so that number, has a chance to keep going up. And on the flip side, WWE now is entering the NFL season. Monday Night Football's back on Monday. And there's no doubt that there's going to be an impact there. How much of an impact, we don't know. But for Raw, to be bringing in wherever they're at on a weekly basis, which it fluctuates, just like with AEW, viewership, key demo rating, all that fluctuates week to week. But, if your new normal now is whatever, 1.789 million viewers, maybe occasionally you hit that 2 million mark. If that's your new normal, and you've got NFL starting back up with big Monday Night Football games that are going to be the most watched thing on TV on Monday nights, how big of an impact, how closer does that put you down to AEW's, new mark when it comes to, a pretty average viewership for them, or an average in the key demo? Those kind of things are just so fascinating right now. And we've said it before. I brought up the Eric Bischoff example of him talking about on 83 Weeks that, he's more fascinated by the business aspect of all this right now. And it's hard not to be, because it's just, this is a fascinating thing to think about, that there is now a television show, which, as we said too, by the way, let's point this out. SmackDown, we know, is drawing the bigger number in WWE. If you're looking at it from what is the biggest show in WWE right now, it's SmackDown, because SmackDown is regularly doing, over 2 million viewers on Fox, because it is on, Fox versus USA. There's a difference there, as we know. And so that's a different discussion. And I know it's one thing to say, well, AEW may eventually beat Raw, which we don't know when that's going to be. I mean, we even did a podcast on this not long ago. I don't even remember when that was, probably several months ago, a couple months, something like that. Could there come that point where we're having this discussion about AEW? And I think we actually may have discussed that with Brandon Thurston when we had him on. Was, could this eventually be something that happens where you see AEW not just beat Raw perhaps in the 18 to 49 demographic, and have that age group really starting to buy into everything that AEW is doing, but could you see that from a viewership standpoint, get to that point where that can happen? And I think it's a very interesting question now, especially coming out of All Out. Can this actually be a possibility to where this happens? And I'm very interested in whether it will. And that's where I think on the flip side for Raw, there's a couple different parts of this equation. It's, can AEW continue this momentum? Can that next big jump for AEW? Let's just throw a wild scenario out. Let's say Bray Wyatt comes into AEW, and all of a sudden there's a big storyline or something with him. That's a possibility. Maybe it's, the Arthur Ashe Stadium show, because they're going to build up a lot for that. We already know you're getting Cody Rhodes, Malachi Black. More than likely, my guess is you're probably at some point going to announce the Miro Eddie Kingston rematch there. And that's another, draw for people, certainly for the local crowd. That's going to be a big match if that happens. There's going to be a lot more. You're probably going to get Bryan Danielson's in-ring debut there pretty soon. And probably, I would assume, if you're building it up for a big show, perhaps that's going to be the show that it happens. There's a lot of different points that you can look at for AEW leading into Full Gear in November, to where maybe they can pop another big rating. Will it be as big as this, 1.3 million? I don't know. But they're now proving that they can get to that point with all the things they're doing. And now it's just keeping that momentum. For Raw, it becomes, how far do you slide back with the NFL back? And I think it's an interesting dynamic to where we've seen Raw kind of get to the point where, like it or not, week in and week out, there's not there people watch Raw, like the numbers show, like they get 1.8, 1.9, whatever million viewers, but the overall stigma surrounding Raw right now has not really changed all that much. For however long you pick a time range, like it really hasn't changed a whole lot. And now, once again, when you have football coming back on Monday nights on ESPN, it's going to be something that's could be a drastic change to where maybe Raw slides down further than we thought. Maybe AEW continues to inch closer and closer, and then maybe we are having the discussion of AEW Dynamite beating Raw not only in the key demo, perhaps eventually on a regular basis, maybe if it gets to that point. But also, does it happen with overall viewership? Is that something that's possible in that scenario? It's going to be easier said than done, as we know, because remember, this is something where, they did bring in Bryan Danielson and Adam Cole. That's, again, as we've said with the CM Punk thing, that was a one-time thing. You get that opportunity to bring him back. Now you get that opportunity to bring in, two active WWE stars to your company on the biggest pay-per-view you've ever done. What's the next thing that's going to be able to jump that up? And are you going to be able to keep those viewers that you've all of a sudden attracted coming off of everything from All Out? How many of those viewers can you keep going forward? And that's going to be the big thing, I think, for AEW. But there is a bigger part of the equation for WWE when it comes to, perhaps how do they counter this, or do they counter this, or what are their options to counter it? That is a bigger question. And before we get into that, if you don't want to have any problems with your own viewership below the waist, go to our friends at Manscaped, because as we continue to talk about, support for 411 on Wrestling is brought to you by Manscaped, the best in below the waist grooming. They're the champions of the world. Manscaped offers precision engineered tools for your family jewels. They just launched the 4th generation trimmer, the Lawnmower 4.0. They're winning the key demo ratings, if you ask me. Forget the 0.53, 0.52s. We're talking the 4.0 with the Lawnmower here. And you can join over 2 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with this exclusive offer just for you. 20% off and free worldwide shipping with the code 411wrestling at manscaped.com. And as I've talked about, I'm one of the first people to try this new Lawnmower 4.0, blown away by the performance, the craftsmanships, and the details. They're all next level on this 4.0. They've engineered the ultimate body trimmer the folks at Manscaped have, and it's just got everything. We keep talking about it. You can be more confident shaving below the waist, the multifunction on-off switch. It's got the travel lock. You've got the upgraded trimmer, which gives you the LED spotlight, the 4000K on-off. You can have a more precise shave with the spotlight. It's even got the wireless charging, which we keep talking about. The new wireless charging system gives you longer battery length, and you can take your time because Manscaped's got you covered. Don't forget, it's also got the additional guard size. It's got the 1 through 4 links there with the guard sizes. So you've got everything you need with this Lawnmower 4.0. And let's be honest, as we keep saying, you know where I'm going here. If you're still shaving your face and body with the same trimmer, you're doing it wrong. Boost your confidence with the new body trimmer from Manscaped. Get 20% off plus free shipping with the code 411wrestling at manscaped.com. Use the best tools for the job, and they come from our friends at Manscaped. 20% off free shipping with the code 411wrestling at manscaped.com. That's 20% off plus free shipping at manscaped.com, and use the code 411wrestling. Unlock your confidence with the new Lawnmower 4.0 from Manscaped. And let's talk about this bigger, perhaps, issue for WWE, which, as we've talked about with the Mick Foley comments, everything about WWE having a problem right now, and perhaps some of the issues with that, and what comes along with it. And part of that is a trust, right? Like, it's the trust issues, and how do people buy into that? What is the thought process there if you're a talent, and you're looking at which company can I trust more? But I think perhaps the bigger thing here is, and I want to, give a shout out to, I mentioned him before, John Pollock and Wei Ting at Post Wrestling. They had a really good discussion, and I think I've seen other people discussing this too, which I find to be a very important part of this, because if we're talking about what does WWE do with Raw to be able to, let's say, get that number with Monday Night Football returning to where maybe that number can get back above 2 million regularly. I don't think that's the expectation right now, just based on if you look at the most recent numbers with Raw, given that it has been around that 1.8, 1.9 million range, those kind of numbers in terms of overall viewership. The key demo and such, as we've said, I mean, you look at the ratings, we just talked about the differences this week in particular with Dynamite and Raw. But I think that the bigger thing is now, what can WWE do, right? Like, I think that's a very good question that those guys brought up when they discussed it, and I've seen other people mentioning it on Twitter. What can WWE do to counter this? They've brought back Brock Lesnar, they brought back Becky Lynch, they brought back Goldberg, they brought back all these people that, quite frankly, aside from the Becky Lynch situation, which is different, they brought back the people that they brought back before. It's, can you bring Steve Austin back every week? Can you bring Goldberg back every week? Brock's gonna be back, but he's on SmackDown. Becky's on SmackDown. If you're looking at it from a Raw standpoint, which they're gonna have the draft, and we know this too, the draft's gonna be coming up in early October. They're gonna have the draft, but what moves are you making that are gonna necessarily change everything for Raw, unless you're moving, Roman Reigns? I think that's probably it, in my opinion. When you look at it from that standpoint, I think the only significant addition right now you could see from a viewership standpoint is if you move Roman Reigns from SmackDown to Raw. Elsewhere, what are the other scenarios? I mean, I guess you could move Becky Lynch there too. I mean, that's certainly a possibility, but right, there's an issue with that, right? Because they're the champions on SmackDown. They're the Universal Champion and the SmackDown Women's Champion. So unless you plan on them losing the belts, which I just don't see happening right now, you're probably not moving either one of those. So I don't know necessarily what to, and I think this is the corner that WWE has painted themselves into. Is this is something where they have gone to the well so many times in bringing back legends time and time again, to where it doesn't necessarily feel new anymore. It just feels like the next one in a long line of these moves that they've made. And that's where I think they put themselves in a situation to where it's, what can you do to be able to perhaps, fend off AEW's momentum and, stop it, unless you're, I really don't know the answer to that question. And I think it's something to think about. I mean, there is one person out there that we have no doubt that would make a huge, significant difference, which, by the way, John Cena came back, not too long ago too. But again, that's a SmackDown related story. He came on Raw. We saw it that one time. But other than that, it wasn't anything that really did anything for Raw other than just that 1 week. Now, look, The Rock probably going to come back at some point. Once again, though, for a program with Roman Reigns, which could probably going to be on SmackDown. So that's really the only stuff you look at here and think, you have a 3-hour Raw every Monday, and unless there is a significant change in direction, creative, storylines, all of these things that go along with bringing in viewers, I don't know in the short term what the solution is for WWE to talk about trying to combat Monday Night Football this season, but not just that, trying to combat, all the momentum that is on AEW's side. Like we said, this is where WWE has the advantage of having SmackDown, because SmackDown is still going to continue, I think, as long as you stay on the current course there on Fox. It's only a 2-hour show. That helps. That's certainly more helpful than a 3-hour show. And it's just, as long as you've got, I think, Roman Reigns leading the way there, it's going to be just fine on SmackDown. And I don't have many issues about SmackDown. You can nitpick certain things that happen on SmackDown. You may not like everything. I don't. I'm sure, I'm not in the same, but I mean, there are a lot of people probably feel the same way. There's good, there's bad, as there is on a lot of wrestling shows. But from a viewership standpoint, and from just the looking at the ratings and all that stuff, I don't really have a lot of concerns necessarily for SmackDown. Raw, though, it's a different question, because Raw is facing similar, or different challenges, when it comes to the competition with the NFL. And, they're not going head to head with Dynamite, but Raw just continues to, kind of be put in a spot where it just does not feel like there's any forward momentum with Raw on a week to week basis. And that's where I think WWE over time can build that back up, but I don't think there's a short term solution anymore for them, other than if they just want to go the route of doing the Legends Nights and those kind of things, which they've gone to so many times now to where after a certain point, does that nostalgia still hold the same effect when you've done it so many times? And I think that's what's going to be the issue when you keep going back to, the Goldbergs and and a lot of other, people they've used in those spots before. I just think that you're each time you do it, it feels less special, right? Like that's the whole thing, which is what we've talked about with AEW. Bringing back a CM Punk, that's special. Taking Bryan Danielson and Adam Cole, two main eventers from the other company, bringing them in, that's special. Perhaps bringing in a Bray Wyatt, like that's a special occasion. Now, at some point, it's also about how do you execute on that and keep the momentum going. And that's where I think you have to give AEW credit. Like they've been able to keep that momentum up to where sure, the viewership ratings could dip, every week, every 2 weeks, whatever, but they've been able to find a way to keep that interest going up further and further. And now coming off their biggest pay-per-view ever, which is once we get the actual numbers, it's going to be their biggest pay-per-view of all time. It's just a matter of how do you keep it going from there. And I think they've set up a lot of things that make you feel like they're going to be able to do that. So perhaps this isn't a one-time discussion we're having here on AEW Dynamite, defeating Raw in the ratings, in the demo. Maybe this is something that we're going to really be looking at here as we move forward on a consistent basis. And maybe it's something that we may not have thought was going to happen 6 months ago, but now you're starting to see that gap is being closed further and further. And as I've said before, this is not a discussion we're having out of saying that WWE is about to go out of business or AEW is going to all of a sudden jump up and start, pulling in 3.7s and all this other stuff. Like, that's not the discussion we're having. We're having it because it is a pretty key moment in AEW's history. And so it is worth talking about to point out that this is something that a company less than 2 years in, we haven't seen this scenario sort of play out before since WWE has, had a lack of competition for so many years, at that level. We haven't really seen anyone get to that point that, you felt like, wait a minute, like this could actually be a thing. But now that we're there, you have to take notice of it and at least, I think, dive a little deeper into what it could mean moving forward. And it's going to play out, I think, in a pretty fascinating manner to see here what's next really for both companies. And, is there a response from WWE? If there is, what is that response that's going to be able to work and really maybe get some momentum going back in Raw's favor? Because I've always said it. We did a podcast on this too several months ago. Just the state of having a 3-hour television show every single week is a challenge in and of itself. But if WWE can't sort of figure that out, which I don't think they've been able to do efficiently at all in recent years, I just don't know what you do, if you don't want this to become a trend where, maybe we're not talking about holiday shows anymore that are losing, in a tiny, slight manner, but it still is something that if you're on the other side of that and you're in AEW, you're going to pat yourself on the back because you're doing some pretty special stuff right now. And it's worthy of the credit. I mean, they deserve the credit for being able to do this. And but it has made the wrestling world a lot more intriguing right now with where everything is at. And as I've said, that's a good thing. That's a very good thing. And I think it's only going to get better from here in terms of the interest, which is going up as we've seen. And really, just a matter of seeing how that pendulum continues to swing. And will it continue to swing in AEW's favor? And what does that look like? Not, next week, but a month from now, 3 months from now, 6 months from now. What does that look like? That's what we're going to wait and find out and see. So there's some thoughts on a big moment for AEW in its history. And hopefully, as we said, a lot more fun stuff coming out of this for both AEW and WWE because it is a really good time to be a wrestling fan. So much going on, so much really cool stuff when you think about it and really where the industry's at right now. Tony Khan mentioned it recently on, his Busted Open radio appearance about how, if you just look at it from a television industry standpoint, like TV loves wrestling right now. And why wouldn't they, based on these deals that AEW and WWE are both getting? So the interest is great and hopefully it continues to go in that direction here moving forward. But of course, you can check out everything we've got going on over 41mania.com. Check out all our news, columns, reviews, they're all there. As I've continued to talk about our YouTube channel, we got a lot of stuff going on up there. Now, on the previous episodes we mentioned, Steve and I going to be starting a nice little series going down memory lane to discuss some of our favorite memories in the history of professional wrestling. Just a lot of sort of random moments, big moments, special stuff like we're talking about here with everything going on with ratings and viewership and all that. I think we'll have some fun with that, and I'll give you a little nostalgia there to continue to feed that part of your wrestling fandom. So check out everything we got going over on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel, please. Be sure to share and like and do all that stuff. We always appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast, 411 on Wrestling. Any podcast app you use, leave us a nice 5-star rating review. That just helps the show reach more people. And we'll continue to have the link to the GoFundMe for Larry Zonka's family in the show notes. So be sure to continue to share and contribute to that if you can. And everything else, 411mania.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at WrestleBlake. For more thoughts on all things wrestling. So thanks as always for listening to this episode of the podcast, and we'll talk to you next time here on the 411 on Wrestling Podcast.